I take the same minibus every morning, the same seat, the same route, the same slow crawl through the gray streets toward work. It's a routine that should feel safe by now, almost comforting. But nothing about the morning 3 days ago felt safe. Not anymore. The first thing I noticed was the front seat. Not the driver's seat, but the one right behind it, empty as always, yet soaked. A dark, heavy imprint shaped exactly like a person's body. The fabric glistened, as if someone had sat down while dripping wet, and then stood up only moments before I stepped inside. But it hadn't rained in days. I paused in the aisle, staring at the imprint. Water had pooled at the edge of the seat and dripped onto the floor, forming thin trails that ran toward the door. It looked fresh. Too fresh. The driver, Mason, a quiet man with permanent shadows under his eyes, glanced at me in the mirror. "You're holding up the line," he said, his tone flat, almost rehearsed. I sat down without arguing, though the seat I chose suddenly felt colder than usual. The minibus moved, jolting along the familiar bumps, yet my mind stayed on that wet mark. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe the seat had been cleaned. Maybe someone with a spilled drink had been there earlier. Maybe the next morning erased all of those maybes. The same seat was soaked again. But this time, the imprint was deeper, darker, as if whoever left it had pressed their full weight into the cushion. The air around it felt damp, like stepping into a room that had just been flooded. Mason didn't look at me this time. He didn't need to. Something in the tightness of his jaw said he already knew what I was staring at. On the third morning, the imprint looked unmistakably human. Shoulders back, even the faint slope where a head would rest. As if someone had settled in for a long ride. Only no one had. I stepped onto the minibus, and for the first time I felt it. This strange pressure in the air, like someone had slipped inside just seconds before me. Like I wasn't the first passenger. Like I wasn't alone. By the fourth morning, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. That stress was twisting ordinary sounds into something sinister. But the minibus had changed, and no matter how hard I tried to pretend otherwise, I felt it from the moment I stepped inside. The air was heavier. Not colder, just thick, like humidity trapped in a tiny room. I could almost taste it, a faint tang of metal and stagnant water. I sat in my usual place, 2 rows behind the driver. The wet imprint on the front seat was still there, deeper now. The cushion caved as though someone still occupied it. It felt wrong looking at it directly, so I focused on the window instead. But the moment I tried to steady myself, a soft creak broke through the quiet. It came from the front seat. Not the frame of the minibus, not the suspension, the seat. A slow, gentle shift, like someone was adjusting their posture, leaning a little to the side. I froze. Everyone else seemed frozen too, though no one looked up. People stared at their knees, at their phones, at the floor. They were trying not to hear it. The seat creaked again. Longer this time. Mason's hand twitched on the steering wheel. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, not toward us, but toward the empty space right behind him. The mirror jerked slightly, like he adjusted it to see better. Then he adjusted it again, a fraction lower, as if trying to catch the right angle to watch someone who wasn't there. A woman sitting across from me shifted uncomfortably. She clutched her purse tight and slid one seat farther back. Then another. She didn't say a word, just kept moving until she reached the last row. A young man stood up and also moved back, pretending to stretch his legs. He glanced at the front seat only once, and in that second I saw the color drain from his face. By the time we reached the third stop, no one was sitting near the front half of the minibus at all. I tried to breathe slowly, quietly, but the pressure in the air kept growing, pushing against my ears. I could hear tiny sounds I never noticed before, the faintest rustle of fabric, like wet clothes shifting, and something like a slow drip hitting the linoleum floor. That was when I heard the whisper. It didn't come from behind me or beside me. It came from everywhere, as if the whole minibus had exhaled at once. A soft, trembling breath. The elderly woman with the blue scarf, the one I'd seen earlier in the week, leaned toward the aisle and murmured just loud enough for me to hear. "He's early today." I swallowed hard. "Who is?" I whispered back. She didn't answer. Instead, she pressed her lips together and stared straight ahead, eyes wide and unblinking. Her knuckles turned white around the handle of her bag. The minibus hit a small bump, and the front seat rocked forward slightly, like someone heavy had just leaned their elbows on their knees. Something was definitely there, something we all chose not to see, but I could feel it now. It felt closer, and it wasn't leaving. The next morning, I almost didn't get on the minibus. I stood at the stop, clutching my coffee cup, telling myself I could call in sick, take a taxi, walk, anything. But routines have a way of pulling you back in, even when every instinct screams to run. So I stepped inside. The first thing I saw was the floor. Wet footprints, small, uneven, as though someone had walked with heavy, dragging steps, led from the front seat directly down the aisle. They stopped near my usual spot, right next to where my feet would be. I hesitated, staring at them. The water wasn't clear. It had this murky tint, like runoff from an old fountain or a puddle that had been sitting too long. It made my stomach twist. When I finally sat down, the cushion beneath me felt slightly damp. I brushed my hand over it, hoping it was just condensation from the cold morning, but the moisture sank into my fingertips. Too warm to be from the window, too fresh to be from the previous ride. Someone had been here, or something. I tried to focus on my breathing, but the air around me had changed again. It felt colder in one narrow band across my right side, as though the temperature had dropped only in that exact spot. When I leaned a little, the cold followed. When I sat straight, it settled right beside me again. That was when I felt it, a faint brush against my sleeve. Light, tentative, wet. I jerked away, heart pounding, but there was nothing beside me. Just the empty seat, the dim aisle, and the soft hum of the engine. I turned my face toward the window, hoping it would ground me. Instead, it made everything worse. In the reflection, the seat behind me looked wrong. Not empty, distorted. The shape wasn't clear, blurred like a smudge left on a fogged mirror, but it was there. A suggestion of shoulders, a dip where a head might be. I blinked. The shape disappeared, but the cold behind my neck didn't. The bus jolted to a stop, and the elderly woman with the blue scarf climbed aboard again. Today, she didn't sit. She grabbed a pole near the middle and kept her eyes glued to the floor. When the minibus started moving, she whispered toward me without lifting her head. "He's following you now." My throat tightened. "What does that mean?" I whispered back. She didn't look up. "You've noticed him, that's all it takes." A shiver crawled across my skin. The footprints at my feet seemed to darken, the moisture spreading slowly outward. I tried to ask another question, but a soft creak rose behind me. Not from the front seat this time. From the row directly behind mine. A sound like someone leaning forward. My breath caught. The reflection in the window blurred again, like something heavy was inches from the glass. Then came the breathing. Not loud, not dramatic, just slow and thick, as though each inhale dragged through waterlogged lungs. It brushed the back of my hair, humid and cold at the same time. I clenched my hands so tightly my nails dug into my palms. "Don't react," the woman whispered. "If you let him know you feel him, he'll stay with you. He'll want more." My heart hammered against my ribs, but the breathing stayed right behind me, inching closer, settling into the shape of a presence I couldn't see, but couldn't deny anymore. Whatever he wasn't just passing through. He had found me. The next morning, I boarded the minibus with the kind of dread that makes your stomach feel too tight to breathe. The rain hadn't stopped all night, and the streets were still shining with puddles, but none of that explained the water that greeted me the moment I stepped inside. It wasn't just on the front seat anymore. It streaked along the floor in thin trails, dark and smeared, as though something had been dragged from the door toward the back rows. The lines curved slightly, as if whatever left them had paused, shifted direction, then continued. My seat was dry this time, but the one directly behind it wasn't. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The air felt colder than usual, not the sharp cold of winter, but a damp chill that clung to the back of my neck. I sat stiffly, barely allowing myself to breathe. The windows were already fogged, even though it was early and the bus wasn't full. I could feel the weight of the fog, like it thickened the space around us. When the door closed, Mason didn't start driving right away. He sat there, hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. The lines of his face looked deeper, older. Then he said, without turning around, "Don't move." No one dared to ask why. He swallowed, then continued, his voice low and shaking. "He's today behind you." My skin crawled. The cold concentrated between my shoulder blades like a wet fingertip pressing lightly, insistently. I managed to whisper, "What is he?" Mason didn't answer at first. He just squeezed the wheel harder. "Don't name him," he finally whispered. "Don't even think a name, he listens." The minibus lurched forward suddenly, too sharply, making everyone flinch. But instead of apologizing, Mason muttered something under his breath, words I couldn't catch, maybe a prayer, maybe something else. I felt the presence behind me shift. A slow, dragging motion, like someone leaning in, placing weight on the seat, inching closer. The cold spread across my upper back, down my arms, wrapping around me like wet fabric. "Why is he following me?" I forced out. Mason's answer came in a tight whisper. "You noticed him, that's all it takes." A heavy, trembling breath brushed the side of my neck. My eyes burned, not from tears, but from the instinct to freeze, to shut down every movement. "Don't turn," Mason said sharply, almost choking on the words. "If you turn, he'll think you're inviting him." I clenched my hands in my lap. My fingers felt numb. The minibus took a corner, and for a split second the interior lights flickered. The moment the world dimmed, something behind me shifted again, closer, heavier, almost leaning over me. I felt droplets land on my shoulder. They were warm, and yet they felt wrong, like they didn't belong to something alive. I whispered, "How long has he been here?" This time it wasn't Mason who answered. It was the elderly woman in the blue scarf, sitting farther back. She spoke with her eyes closed, as if forcing the words through a locked door. "Since the morning he missed the bus," she said. "He ran, he slipped. They found him in the ditch by the roadside. But he wasn't just dead. He was soaked, as if pulled from somewhere deeper than water." Her voice trembled. "And now he rides, every dawn, waiting for someone to notice him, waiting for someone who might look back." A creak sounded directly behind my ear. I bit my lip to stop a scream. Mason's voice cracked. "Remember the rule, never turn around." But then he added something that chilled me more than anything else so far. "If he chooses you, there may come a day when not turning won't be enough." The breathing behind me thickened, like waterlogged lungs struggling to pull in air. I sat frozen, feeling the cold hand of something unseen pressing into the space between my shoulders, patient and waiting, as though testing the edges of my fear, learning the shape of it. And I knew with absolute certainty, he wasn't going to stop. Not now, not after finding me. I didn't want to get on the minibus the next day. My whole body resisted the idea, my hands trembling as I held my bag, my steps slower than they'd ever been. But dawn always comes, and with it, the routine dragged me forward. Avoiding the route felt impossible, like something was pulling me toward it. When I stepped inside, the lights flickered as if reacting to me. For a heartbeat, the interior glowed pale and ghostly, revealing streaks of wetness smeared across the walls like someone had dragged dripping fingers along the metal. Mason didn't greet me. He didn't look up. He just stared straight ahead, jaw tight, hands unmoving on the wheel. The elderly woman with the blue scarf wasn't there today. Neither were most of the usual passengers. The air felt wrong. Too quiet. Too attentive. I sat slowly, certain the seat behind me was occupied even though I refused to check. The cold was immediate this time. The heavy, suffocating cold of something standing too close in an empty room. I forced myself to breathe evenly, but it didn't matter. The cold followed every inhale, filling my lungs with the smell of wet earth and stagnant water. Mason finally spoke, his voice a dry whisper. "You deserve to know the truth now." I didn't speak. I couldn't. The cold behind me pulsed as though leaning closer, listening. Mason glanced into the mirror, then quickly looked away. "He's paying attention," he muttered, "but I think he wants you to understand." The minibus rolled forward, tires hissing across the damp pavement. "He wasn't always like this," Mason continued. "He was just a man, a commuter, someone like you. He caught this route every morning for years." The cold behind me tightened, like a hand resting on my spine. "One day," Mason said, "he overslept. He ran to catch the minibus at this exact stop. People said he was waving, calling out. The driver didn't see him, maybe didn't want to stop. He slipped on the wet road and fell into the ditch." I swallowed hard. "They said he drowned," I whispered. "No," Mason replied. "That's the part that never made sense. There was barely any water, just mud, but when they found him," his voice trailed off. "Wet," I said softly, "like he came from somewhere else." Mason nodded once. "Completely soaked, as if he'd been submerged for hours. His clothes, his hair, everything dripping. The ditch couldn't have done that, it was never deep enough." A chill ran down my arms. "But why is he here?" Mason exhaled shakily. "The old driver quit after that. He said he kept seeing something sitting in the front seat, dripping onto the floor. When he tried to look directly at it, the shape blurred, like it didn't belong fully in this world." Another creak rose behind me, slow, deliberate, as though someone shifted their weight, sliding closer. "Every driver after him noticed it," Mason said. "Some lasted a week, some only a day. All of them learned the same rule." My voice barely held steady. "Don't turn around." "Never," Mason said. "Because when you do, you pull him into focus. You make him real. Your attention feeds him." I felt moisture collecting on my shoulder again, heavy, warm drops that slid down the fabric of my coat. "He wants to be seen," Mason whispered. "He wants someone to finish the moment he missed. The moment he reached for the bus and no one looked at him." The minibus hit a small dip in the road, and the cold behind me pressed harder, almost curling around me like damp, unseen arms. Mason's voice cracked. "You've noticed him too much already. He knows your shape, your breathing, your seat. Once he marks someone, he follows until they turn." My throat tightened. "What happens if they don't?" Mason hesitated. "No one has ever lasted long enough to find out." The window beside me fogged suddenly, a thick smear spreading outward from a single point, like someone's face had leaned against the glass from the inside of the fog, exhaling slowly. A vague silhouette formed behind me in the reflection. Not clear, not solid, but real enough to feel. Mason's whisper trembled. "He chose you, and he's getting clearer every day." That morning, the streets were gray and silent, the kind of gray that seeps into your bones. I walked to the bus stop slower than usual, dragging my bag as if it weighed more than just clothes and papers. The world around me felt muted, as if holding its breath. And I knew the moment I stepped inside the minibus, it was going to notice me. I took my usual seat, stiff and alert. The front seat was soaked, deeper and darker than ever. The wet imprint stretched across the cushion, forming shoulders and a head that looked almost, but not quite, human. I forced my gaze to the window, pretending not to see it, yet I felt its presence pressing against me, heavy, patient, insistent. The minibus was nearly empty. A few early commuters sat far behind, their eyes flicking nervously toward the front before dropping back to their laps. The air smelled of damp leather, wet asphalt, and something else, something metallic and impossible. Then I felt it, cold, wet, heavy, across my shoulder, then my upper arm. Something pressing into me, a weight I could not see, moist fingers dragging lightly, insistently along my coat. My breath caught sharp and ragged as the reality of it sank in. The mirrors fogged instantly. In the reflection, I saw a shadow. Not a full figure, just a suggestion, a blur that shifted and pulsed like water. Behind it, the outline of the bus twisted and elongated, as if the reflection itself were bending to accommodate a presence that didn't belong. And then came the voice. Soft, close to my ear. Wet, guttural, almost breathing through water. "Look," I froze, my pulse thundering. Every instinct screamed to obey the old rule. Don't turn, don't look, but my body betrayed me. My head lifted, just slightly. The shadow blurred and thickened, stretching across the fogged mirror like a living smear. The wet weight on my shoulder grew heavier, pressing down, gripping me as if testing whether I could bear it. "Look," it whispered again, closer, almost a caress against my ear, a cold droplet rolling down my neck. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to block it. But the air vibrated with its presence, the mirrors weeping condensation in strange, unnatural patterns. My reflection stared back at me, distorted as if two layers of reality overlapped. And in that smear, I could see it. A shadowed head, wet and leaning, shoulders hunched, waiting. I wanted to scream, wanted to bolt. But the weight held me down, relentless. The minibus jolted over a bump. I felt the wet fingers press into my shoulder blade, dragging slowly toward my spine. The breath in my ear became heavier, slower, deliberate, like lungs filled with water trying to pull me in. "Look," it hissed once more. I couldn't. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying. The wet weight lingered, patient, terrifyingly alive. I could feel it moving, sensing, learning the shape of me. I could hear the faintest drip of moisture against the floor, the steady shift of something behind the seat I refused to glance at. It had found me, and it wanted to be seen. It wanted me to turn. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to pretend the weight wasn't there, tried to tell myself it would leave if I didn't give it attention. But it didn't move. It waited. And I knew deep down that when it finally succeeded, nothing would be the same. The bus was nearly empty that morning. Only Mason and I remained, the wet air pressing down like a living thing. I could feel it behind me, heavier than ever, its damp weight brushing my shoulders and back as if testing the limits of my fear. Every instinct screamed at me not to turn, not to look, but my muscles trembled from exhaustion, and my mind fought a losing battle against curiosity. The mirrors fogged instantly. In the reflection, I saw it. The shadow leaning, blotched, and pulsing like a smear of water, waiting for my eyes. My breath caught, sharp and shallow, as the cold dripped down my neck. The wet weight pressed harder. Mason's voice cut through the silence. "Don't turn." "Not yet," I nodded, though it offered little comfort. The wetness seemed to seep into my skin now, clinging to every nerve, every inch of my coat, crawling along my spine. The air smelled of wet mud and iron, a smell that was not of this world. "Look!" The whisper came again, closer, heavier. I could feel the pressure pressing down on my shoulders, spreading to my arms, to my hands. It wanted attention, wanted acknowledgement, and I knew that if I gave it, it would become fully real. The bus jolted over a bump. My seat shifted under the invisible weight, and I felt a wet, cold hand press into my shoulder, dragging toward my neck. My pulse thundered in my ears. The mirrors rippled, and the reflection blurred into a dark shape, waiting, urging. I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear, but I didn't move. I clung to the rule, repeating it silently in my mind. "Don't look, don't look, don't look." Then the breath stopped. Silence. Thick, heavy, waiting. The wet weight lingered as if calculating my endurance. Mason didn't glance at me this time, his hands tightening on the wheel, sweat dripping down his face. A slow, deliberate sound rose from behind me. A shuffle, two distinct, wet steps landing on the floor just beyond my chair. My stomach turned. My throat burned. And then came the command, soft, insistent, wet. "Look!" I couldn't hold it any longer. My head turned. The instant my eyes met the front seat, the minibus froze in a heavy, electric silence. Two dark, glistening imprints rested there now, one deep, wet, and familiar, the other mine. The shadow leaned forward, hunched, almost smiling, a shape formed entirely from water and darkness, alive and undeniably real. I felt its breath on my neck. The weight crushed my chest. And for a terrifying moment, I realized the truth. Seeing it made it complete. Mason's voice cracked behind me. Now it's real. The bus moved on, the wet darkness settling over my seat, sharing it, claiming it, and I understood something cold and final. Some things, once noticed, never leave. I was not alone, and I never would be. The wet prints glistened in the morning light, 2 of them now.